The faint scent of cedar and smoke lingered in the air. He handed her a towel. Dry off. Ava accepted it, hesitating before murmuring, "Thank you." He nodded once, eyes still on the windshield, where the city bled neon into rain. "I'm Elias," he said after a beat. "Elias King." The name stirred something recognition. King Holdings. The tech empire everyone in New York whispered about. Ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said quietly. "You don't even know me." "I don't have to," Elias replied. "But I know that look." She frowned. "What look?" "The one people wear right before they lose everything." Ava's throat tightened. She turned away, watching the storm run down the glass. "You sound like you've been there," she said. He didn't answer right away. His hand flexed on the steering wheel, tendons sharp under pale skin. "I have," he said finally. "Once." The city passed in streaks of color: red, silver, rain-washed blue. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the storm softening above them. Elias glanced sideways. "So, who broke you tonight?" She gave a brittle laugh. "You think it's that simple?" "It usually is." Ava hesitated, then whispered, "Someone I trusted. Someone who made me believe we were building the same dream." He didn't speak, but his jaw set a flicker of recognition again. "Daniel Moore?" he asked suddenly. Her eyes snapped to his. "You know him?" Elias exhaled through his nose, almost smiling. Though there was no humor in it, you could say our paths crossed. "He took something from me once, something worth far more than money." A shiver crawled up Ava's spine, not from the cold. "So this is what?" Then she asked, "Coincidence, maybe?" His gaze locked with hers, or maybe storms bring the right people to the same street. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to that small, dim space between them: rain outside, silence within, two strangers recognizing pain in each other. Elias broke it first. "Where should I take you?" Ava hesitated. Her apartment was across town. But the idea of facing its emptiness felt unbearable. "Anywhere dry?" He nodded, started the engine. "There's a cafe still open on 45th. Quiet. You can think there." As the car moved, Ava leaned her head back. The exhaustion hit like a tide. She felt the thrum of the wheels beneath them, the steady rhythm of rain on glass, and, strangely, safety. Elias didn't look at her again, but his voice was softer when he said, almost to himself, "You'll need to start over." "I already have," she murmured. "The moment I stepped into your car." He glanced at her reflection in the window, the streaks of mascara, the stubborn tilt of her chin. There was something fierce in her that he recognized. A survivor's light. And for the first time in years, Elias King, the man the world called heartless, felt curiosity burn through the armor. When they reached the cafe, he parked but didn't move. "You're not staying?" she asked. He shook his head. "You don't owe anyone explanations tonight, least of all me." She opened the door, then paused. "Why did you stop for me?" "Mr. King." Elias met her gaze. The city lights flickered in his gray eyes. "Because I remember what it's like to drown in a storm and pretend you're not." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded once, closed the door, and walked into the rain. Elias watched until her silhouette disappeared under the awning, then leaned back in his seat. The rain tapped against the windshield, a metronome for a thought he couldn't shake. He hadn't planned on stopping. He never stopped for anyone. But something about Ava Johnson had unsettled the quiet equilibrium of his world, the same world Daniel Moore had once tried to destroy. Elias's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant lit up the screen. Crestwood merger confirmed. Daniel Moore to join board next month. Elias's jaw tightened. The glow of the phone cast a pale light across his face, all sharp edges and resolve. He looked back at the cafe door, at the faint outline of the woman he'd just met. Then, quietly, almost to the rain itself, he said, "Maybe this time, fate sent me an ally." Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside the cafe, Ava ordered coffee, unaware that the man who'd just driven away was already rewriting both of their destinies. 3 days later, the rain had cleared, but the city still smelled of its wet asphalt, iron, and the faint sweetness of something washed clean. Ava had almost convinced herself that the night with the stranger in the Bentley had been a fever dream. Then an email arrived. From King Holdings, subject, Private Design Commission, immediate response required. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but the address was real. And so was the attached document, an official offer to design the interior of a new Manhattan residence owned by Elias King. She reread it twice. The number on the contract made her pulse skip more money than she'd seen in years. And yet, it wasn't the figure that unsettled her. It was the man behind it. Was this gratitude pity or something else entirely? Ava almost deleted the email. Almost. But something in her refused to let fear dictate the next move. She replied, "I'll take the meeting." The next morning, the elevator in King Holdings rose silently through the mirrored tower. Ava's reflection shifted in the glass, hair sleek. Chin lifted, eyes steady, though her heart thudded beneath her coat. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world of black steel and soft light. The air hummed with precision, everything minimalist, cold, deliberate. A receptionist guided her toward the top floor. Elias stood by the window when she entered, back turned, the skyline behind him a collage of silver and storm. He didn't greet her immediately, just said, "You came. I said I would." He turned then, eyes catching the light. There was no surprise in them. No charm, just a quiet acknowledgement that felt strangely personal. "I need the house finished in 3 months," he said, motioning toward the table where blueprints lay unfurled. "It's not just a home. It's a statement." Of what, she asked. He hesitated. "Control." The answer made her lips tighten, but she nodded. "Then we'll make sure it speaks exactly that." For weeks, they worked like two planets drawn by invisible gravity, but careful never to collide. The mansion on the Upper East Side became their shared battlefield marble. Steel and glass layered with ideas and silences. Ava learned that Elias rarely smiled. He spoke in clipped sentences, watched more than he talked, and expected perfection without ever asking for it outright. Yet beneath that calm, she sensed something wounded, a pulse of grief and rage that matched her own. Late nights stretched into dawn. He would bring her coffee without asking how she took it. She'd fix his tie absent-mindedly before meetings. Little gestures neither acknowledged. One night, as she sketched in the empty living room, Elias appeared at the doorway. "You work like the world might end if you stop." She looked up. "Doesn't it?" Sometimes he came closer, stopping just short of her desk. "You remind me of someone I used to know." "Someone you lost?" she asked. He studied her, someone who believed people could be better than they are. A beat passed long enough for the air between them to shift. Then she said softly, "And you stopped believing that I stopped believing in intentions," he said. "They're just stories people tell before they betray you." She smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but recognition. "You sound like someone still trying to forgive himself." That made him blink. No one had ever said that to him, not his board, not the women who tried to impress him, not even Daniel, the man who'd once called him brother. He turned away before answering. "We should stick to work, Miss Johnson." "Of course, Mr. King." But something unspoken had already changed. By the third month, the mansion had begun to take shape, glass walls framing the skyline, clean lines softened by light, spaces meant for solitude. "This house doesn't feel like you," Ava said one evening, walking through the finished hallway. He followed her gaze. "It isn't supposed to." "Then who is it for?" He didn't answer, just watched her trace her hand along the edge of the marble counter, her fingers leaving faint fog on the polished surface. "You keep building fortresses," she said quietly. "But you forget that walls don't just keep people out. They keep you in." He stared at her, expression unreadable. "And you think you see through me, I think," she said, meeting his eyes. "You're tired of being seen as the man who feels nothing." The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment, Elias said nothing. Then, with a faint, almost incredulous laugh, "You're reckless." "So are you," she replied. "Otherwise you wouldn't have hired me." The air shifted again, charged, trembling. He looked at her like someone standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. "Go home." "Ava," he said at last, voice rougher than before, "you've done enough for today." But when she left, he didn't move for a long time. The following week, she brought the final model, a miniature of the mansion, precise and luminous. They set it on the glass table in his study. He bent to look at it, his reflection mingling with hers in the surface. "It's perfect." Ava shook her head. "It's beautiful. But it's not perfect. Perfection doesn't breathe." Their eyes met in the reflection. Something tightened in his throat. "Why do you keep contradicting me because no one else does?" Silence, then a faint smile, rare, quiet, real. "You're not afraid of me. Should I be?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The rain began outside, sudden, insistent, a mirror of the night they met. "You should go," he said again, but his voice betrayed him. She didn't. "Do you ever stop controlling everything?" she asked, softly. His eyes flickered. "Only when I forget who I am. And who are you now?" He breathed in, slow, someone who's forgetting. She didn't know who moved first, maybe both at once, but the space between them vanished. His hand found her jaw, tentative, as if waiting for her to pull away. She didn't. The first kiss wasn't gentle. It was hungry, startled. The collision of two people who had spent too long pretending they didn't need anyone. When they finally broke apart, the world outside was drowned in rain again. Ava pressed her forehead against his chest, hearing the steady thud of his heart beneath the fine fabric. "We shouldn't," she whispered. "I know." His hand traced the back of her neck, trembling slightly. "But I don't care." He kissed her again, slower this time, less about want, more about surrender. Later, when the storm eased and the city softened back into silence, Ava lay awake, tracing patterns in the darkness. She thought of the man beside her, the one who ruled empires, but couldn't rule himself. She thought of the way he'd looked at her, not with possession, but recognition. And beneath the warmth, a quiet unease curled in her chest, because she could feel it already, the pull of something neither of them was ready to name, something that would demand everything. Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, silver against their skin. Ava turned to look at him. Elias slept, one hand still resting against her hip as though to prove she was real. In that stillness, she realized this wasn't the end of a storm. It was the calm before a bigger one. She closed her eyes, knowing the next day would change everything again. They tried to keep their love invisible, hidden between business meetings and blueprints, buried in glances that lingered too long. But secrets have their own pulse. They grow louder when you try to silence them. Elias had never been good at silence. He told himself what they had was manageable, a distraction, an arrangement of convenience. But every night she spent in his home eroded that logic. Ava's presence turned his sterile rooms into something almost human. Her laughter softened the echo of his loneliness. He caught himself waiting for her messages, memorizing the way her voice lifted when she talked about her work. It frightened him, not the feeling itself, but the loss of control it demanded. Ava, meanwhile, lived in a fragile peace. She knew this could not last. She was the architect of other people's homes. But she'd built her own happiness on borrowed ground. When he kissed her, she could taste restraint, the hesitation of a man haunted by something unfinished. Still, she stayed. Because for once, she wasn't designing a future. She was living in the moment. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Ava had arrived early for their meeting, rain still clinging to her coat. Elias was in a call, his voice muffled behind the closed door of his study. She wandered into the adjoining office to review materials for the next phase of the project. Stacks of documents lay in careful order on the mahogany desk: contracts, architectural drafts, and a black folder marked with his initials. She meant to ignore it, but a loose page had slid halfway out, covered in familiar handwriting. Her heart paused. Daniel Moore? Crestwood Corporation? Financial irregularities? A chill moved through her chest. She looked closer, turning the page. Inside were investigative reports, emails, bank transfers, private correspondence. Her name appeared too, circled in red. Next to it, primary contact for access, potential leverage. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to tilt, the room spinning with too many meanings at once. Leverage, that single word detonated inside her. The door opened behind her. Ava Elias's voice calm, curious until he saw the folder in her hands. Then silence. She turned slowly. Her eyes were dry, sharp, the color of storm clouds right before they break. "This was your plan?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. A single beat stretched, heavy as thunder. "Tell me I'm wrong," she whispered. "Tell me I didn't just find proof that you hired me to get to him." His throat tightened. He took a step forward, then stopped, because she had already stepped back. "It started that way," he said quietly. She let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Started." He moved closer, desperate now. "Ava, listen." "No, you listen." Her voice cracked, but it didn't falter. "You made me believe this was real, that what we had meant something. It does. Then why am I in your file cabinet?" The question sliced clean through him. Elias had spent years mastering control over markets, over people, over his own story. But standing there, He realized that control meant nothing when the truth finally asked for payment. "I didn't plan this," he said, low, almost pleading. "Not you. You were never supposed to be collateral damage," she finished for him. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. "You think you're the only one Daniel hurt? You think revenge gives you back what you lost?" He reached for her hand. She flinched. "Ava, please." But she had already made her choice. She closed the folder, set it on his desk with careful precision, like a blueprint she was finished with. "I won't be a tool for your vengeance," she said. "Not yours, not his, not anyone's." Then she turned and walked out before he could find the words to stop her. Elias didn't chase her. Not that night. He stood in the middle of his office, surrounded by the wreckage of his own intentions, and realized he had done the one thing he swore never to do again. He had used someone good to fix something broken inside himself. He opened the folder again, staring at Daniel's name. It no longer burned with rage. It just looked hollow, irrelevant. The revenge he'd built his world around suddenly felt like an echo from another life. Outside, the sky broke open with rain. He let it come. He didn't move when water streaked across the window, drowning out the lights of the city below. For the first time in years, Elias King felt something close to regret. Not the kind you bury under power or money, but the kind that leaves you standing alone in a room that finally tells the truth. Ava spent the night walking. Her phone buzzed with calls she didn't answer. The rain clung to her skin, the way his hands had only hours before. She tried to be angry, but mostly, she felt foolish. How easily she'd wanted to believe in him. How carelessly she'd handed over her trust again. By the time dawn broke, her shoes were ruined, her throat raw from crying. But her mind was clear. This was over. She would finish the project, submit her final designs, and leave New York if she had to. No more powerful men with haunted eyes. No more storms disguised as salvation. The following morning, Elias arrived at the mansion late. Her desk was empty. The model she'd built, the house of glass and light they had dreamed into form, sat in the middle of the room. On the top was a note in her handwriting. "I designed this place to reflect whoever lives inside it. I hope one day you do." He traced the letters with his thumb, throat closing. The city outside was waking up horns, traffic, the pulse of a world that didn't care about the heartbreak of billionaires. He sank into the chair she used to occupy, surrounded by her scent, and whispered to the empty room, "I never meant to lose you." But it was too late. The phone on his desk buzzed again. Another message from his legal team about the Crestwood lawsuit. He didn't even open it. For once, he didn't care who won. Because the only thing he'd wanted to destroy was already gone, and it wasn't Daniel. It was himself. That night, Elias stood on the balcony of the nearly finished mansion, rain falling in thin, silvery threads below. The city glowed indifferent. He raised a glass, the taste of scotch bitter on his tongue. "To victory," he murmured, but the word felt empty. In the reflection of the glass door, he saw not the man who'd built an empire, but the one she'd left behind, a man who'd traded love for revenge and couldn't tell the difference until it was gone. Lightning flared across the skyline, catching the edge of the model house through the window, their dream frozen in miniature. And in that brief, merciless flash, Elias understood something he never had before. Love doesn't just make you weak. It makes you see yourself, and sometimes that's the cruelest betrayal of all. 3 months passed, and the city of angels took her in. Los Angeles wasn't kind, but it was clean of memory, of rain, of him. Ava told herself she was starting over. That new light meant new skin. She found an old warehouse near Venice Beach, stripped it down to bare brick and glass, and built her studio there. It smelled of paint and possibility. Clients trickled in. Small jobs at first: a cafe, a private loft, a boutique hotel, until the name Ava Johnson Interiors began to appear in design blogs. She didn't answer the phone when Elias called. Not once. His name flashed on her screen more times than she could count. Eventually, he stopped trying. She thought that would bring relief. It didn't, because silence was heavier than anger. One evening, the gallery down the street invited her to a private showing, Light Through Glass, a collection of urban photographs. She almost declined. But something in the title caught her, and she went. The space was quiet, dimly lit, filled with the hum of soft jazz and people murmuring over champagne. The photographs hung like fragments of memory reflections. Raindrops, faceless silhouettes caught in motion. She stood before one piece longer than the others, a woman seen through a rain-blurred window. Head bowed, umbrella forgotten. The caption read, "The moment before forgiveness." Her heart tightened. Because it wasn't just a photograph, it was her. The curve of her shoulders, the fall of her hair. And suddenly, she felt him. Elias stood a few steps away, unannounced, unguarded. He looked different, leaner, older somehow, as if guilt had carved the sharpness from his face. The tailored suit was still there, but the armor wasn't. "Ava," he said quietly. Her pulse stuttered. The sound of his voice cracked open, something she thought she had buried. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Your work found me first." He nodded toward the gallery wall. "They commissioned this series for an exhibit in New York. I saw the photo and knew. That was taken the night you—" She stopped herself. The words were still sharp after all this time. "You shouldn't have come." He didn't move closer, but his voice lowered. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I came because I owe you something I never learned how to give." She folded her arms. "And what's that?" "An apology without an excuse." The room seemed to blur around them. People moved, laughed, clinked glasses, and yet it felt like they were the only two people left in the world. Ava's throat tightened. "You think words fix what you broke?" "No," he said. "But maybe they stop it from breaking me too." There was no arrogance in him now, no trace of the man who once believed the world could be rebuilt through power. Just quiet sincerity, stripped raw. They stepped outside together, unable to stay in the room any longer. The city was cool, a faint drizzle blurring the neon signs. The rain in Los Angeles never came like New York's, it whispered, instead of shouted. Elias took a breath. "You were right. You know, that night when you said I didn't understand love, I thought it was control, strategy, something I could build like a company. But you—" He paused, looking at her. "You were chaos. And I didn't know how to love chaos without trying to cage it." Her voice was small. "And now I'd rather drown in it than live without it." Ava stared at him, torn between fury and the ache that never died. "You don't get to say that now." He nodded slowly. "I know." Silence hung between them. Then she said, softer, "You don't regret loving me. You regret loving me the wrong way." He looked up, surprised she'd said the very thing he couldn't. "Yes," he whispered. "Exactly that." The rain grew steadier. Ava felt the chill through her dress, but didn't move. Something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness yet, maybe the faint tremor of release. "You know what hurts the most," she said. "You made me believe I was more than a means to an end. And for a while, I think you believed it too." "I did." He stepped forward. "I still do." She shook her head, tears threatening. "Don't." But he didn't speak again. He just looked at her, the kind of look that says everything time has refused to fix. When she finally turned away, he didn't follow. Ava walked back into the gallery, pretending her heart hadn't started bleeding again. From the doorway, Elias watched her until she disappeared among the art. He didn't know why he stayed, maybe punishment, maybe hope. The drizzle turned to rain. He took off his coat and let it soak through. Around him, the city glowed, headlights smeared across the wet pavement, like veins of light under skin. He waited until the gallery lights went out and the crowd dispersed. Still, he stayed. By the time the janitor locked up, dawn was breaking a faint silver edge to the horizon. Elias stood there, drenched, eyes red but calm, as if the storm outside finally matched the one inside him. He whispered into the quiet street, "Good night, Ava," though she was long gone. Ava drove home in silence. The windshield wipers beat a slow rhythm against the drizzle, her thoughts racing faster than the car. She could still hear his voice, see the tremor in his hands when he said her name. And despite herself, she felt something she didn't want to name. Not love, not forgiveness, but a small, dangerous spark of empathy. She hated that she still understood him. At home, she peeled off her wet dress, stood under the shower until the water ran cold, and finally let herself cry. It wasn't grief anymore. It was the last echo of something she'd never fully mourned. She curled up on the bed, exhaustion pressing her into sleep. The next morning, light streamed through the blinds, pale and soft. Ava stirred, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach, an odd, heavy warmth she couldn't quite explain. For a moment she thought it was nothing, just fatigue. But when she looked in the mirror later that week, she noticed the change subtle, undeniable. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, heartbeat quickening, mind spinning through impossible math. It had been weeks since she'd seen him, weeks since the night that ended everything. Her hand trembled as it pressed against her abdomen. The realization came slow, like dawn breaking over a stormy sea. She wasn't alone. Life, small, fragile, defiant, had found its way back inside her. Ava let out a breath that was half sob, half laughter. The irony was unbearable and perfect at once. From the ashes of betrayal, from the ruin of love, something pure had survived. Outside, the drizzle continued, soft as a secret. She walked to the window, looking out at the pale sky, her hand resting gently over the promise inside her. "Looks like the storm wasn't the end after all," she whispered. Somewhere across the city, Elias King would wake to another morning of silence, unaware that destiny and perhaps forgiveness had already begun to rewrite their story. Los Angeles had always felt like a city built for reinvention, a place where people came to outrun their ghosts under perfect skies. For Ava, it was less about sunshine and more about distance. Distance from him, from the rain, from everything that reminded her of the life she'd almost built in New York. She found an old studio on Melrose, once a mechanic's shop, now stripped down to bare concrete and skylights. The first few months, she filled it with color swatches of fabric, sketches pinned to walls, fragments of dreams that no longer hurt to touch. She didn't give interviews. She ignored offers to feature her comeback. She just worked until her hands were sore and her eyes blurred. Her two closest friends, Mia and Jonah, worried she was pushing too hard. But Ava needed the noise of creation to drown the echo of what she'd lost. Work became her only rhythm draw: design, deliver, repeat. It happened on an ordinary morning, the kind that begins without consequence and ends changing everything. She'd been up since dawn, finishing a layout for a hotel lobby. The smell of coffee mixed with sawdust and paint. The floor tilted slightly when she stood. And for the first time in years, Ava had to grab the table for balance. She thought it was exhaustion, or maybe dehydration. But later, when the nausea came uninvited, insistent, a different possibility whispered through her mind. One she tried to silence. Still, the thought wouldn't leave. That afternoon, she drove to a small clinic on the west side, the kind where no one knew your name and everyone respected your silence. The doctor's voice was calm, professional. You're about 8 weeks along. The world tilted again, this time not from dizziness, but disbelief. Ava sat still, the sterile scent of antiseptic in the air, heartbeat echoing in her ears. 8 weeks. That meant she closed her eyes. Elias's face flickered behind them, uninvited and unbearably vivid. The night of the gallery, the rain, the way he'd said her name. "Do you want to hear it?" the doctor asked gently. She nodded without thinking. The room filled with a faint, fluttering sound, rhythmic, rapid, impossibly small. Her baby's heartbeat. And just like that, the dam broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet, trembling, but not of regret. There was awe there, too. Something raw and ancient. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. "Hi, little one. I guess it's just us now." The weeks that followed were a blur of contradictions. She'd always been composed, decisive. Practical now, her emotions came like tides. Joy in one breath, fear in the next. There were nights she sat awake, hand resting on her abdomen, wondering what kind of mother she could possibly be. And yet, every time she thought of not keeping the baby, the memory of that heartbeat returned fragile but relentless. She told no one except Mia and Jonah. Mia, always the romantic, had cried. "You're going to be amazing, Ava. You were born to build beautiful things this time. It's just life itself." Jonah had simply hugged her. No words needed. It was Mia who came with her to the 12-week scan. And when the doctor turned the screen toward them, smiling, Ava nearly forgot how to breathe. "Looks like there are 2 heartbeats," he said. "Congratulations, you're having twins." Twins. A laugh broke from her lips, wild and tearful all at once. 2 tiny pulses flickered on the screen, 2 lives, 2 chances to get it right. Later, in the car, Mia squeezed her hand. "You okay?" Ava nodded, staring out the window at the endless blue sky. For the first time in a long while, "Yeah, I think I am." Pregnancy softened and sharpened her all at once. She learned to slow down, to breathe through exhaustion, to accept help even when it bruised her pride. The studio became her sanctuary. She designed between appointments, painted between waves of nausea, and let her growing belly redefine the space. When the press came asking for her story, she sent polite rejections. When King Holdings launched a new charitable foundation in her old city, she turned the page without reading the name behind it. But sometimes, late at night, she would catch her reflection in the window, the curve of her stomach, the faint smile she didn't recognize, and whisper, "He'll never know." And that thought, instead of bitterness, brought peace, because this was hers now, a life untouched by power, revenge, or regret. The final weeks, were a haze of heat and anticipation. Mia moved in temporarily to help, and Jonah assembled cribs with more enthusiasm than skill. They painted the nursery in soft amber and white. 2 names were written in pencil on the wall above the cribs, Noah and Luna. "I like the balance," Mia had said. "Sun and moon, boy and girl, 2 halves of a whole." Ava smiled. "That's what they'll be. The light and the calm." She didn't say it aloud, but she knew those names also meant beginning and forgiveness. When the contractions came, it was midnight. The city outside was quiet. The hum of traffic softened by ocean wind. At the hospital, everything blurred into movement, nurses, monitors, the sharp rhythm of breath. Hours passed. Then 2 cries, first one, then the other, filled the room, slicing through the fog of pain. Ava laughed and wept at once, reaching for them. 2 perfect miracles, slippery and furious and alive. "Noah," she whispered to the first, "and Luna." The nurse smiled. "Beautiful names. They're the only ones I ever wrote down," Ava said, voice shaking. When she finally held both babies against her chest, something inside her, something long dormant, cracked open. It wasn't just love. It was relief. It was the feeling of surviving herself. Weeks later, the studio was quieter. The world had shrunk to bottles and lullabies, sleepless nights and soft coos. Ava found herself painting again, small canvases this time. The first one she finished showed 2 halos of light intertwined, one gold, one silver, against a deep, stormy blue. She hung it in the nursery, above their cribs. No one but Mia and Jonah knew who the father was. And that was how she wanted it for now. Elias King belonged to another city, another life, another version of her. This one, the woman humming quietly over her children. Building a future with her own 2 hands, was someone new. Someone reborn. Sometimes, when the babies slept, she'd sit by the window and watch the rain drift in from the Pacific, rare, gentle, almost tender. And in those moments, she would think of him, not with anger, not even with longing, just a quiet understanding that their story wasn't finished, only paused, waiting for whatever destiny had planned next. She pressed a kiss to Noah's forehead, then to Luna's. "Your mother built worlds," she whispered, "but none as beautiful as you." Outside, the rain fell harder, soft against the glass, not a storm this time, just a lullaby. 2 years passed. New York was still the same city of glass and ambition, but Elias King was not the same man who once ruled it. The world still knew his name, but now it was attached to something different. King Foundation, empowering women, restoring futures. When the press asked why he'd walked away from King Holdings, the empire he'd built with precision and ice, he'd simply said, "Because power means nothing if you can't look yourself in the mirror." No one knew the truth that the reflection he could no longer face wasn't his own, but the ghost of a woman who once told him he didn't understand love. Her name still followed him like a quiet echo, Ava. Ava Johnson had become exactly what she once dreamed and feared she could be, a name that opened doors in both coasts. Her design firm had grown beyond the tiny warehouse in Los Angeles. Magazines called her the voice of human architecture, praising her for turning cold structures into living emotions. She was raising her twins Noah and Luna with the same mix of grace and steel that built her career. Their laughter filled every corner of her world, anchoring her in a peace she had fought to earn. Love wasn't something she thought about anymore. It was a language she'd once spoken fluently, but no longer needed. So when the invitation came, she almost declined. King Foundation Headquarters, Interior Design, Bid Presentation, Project Director Elias King. Her first instinct was to delete it. Then she read the last line of the proposal. "We are building a home for resilience, inspired by the women who taught us what it means." And just like that, her hands stopped shaking. She accepted the meeting. The headquarters sat on the riverfront, steel and stone against the water, softened by light. The lobby smelled faintly of cedar, like the city after rain. Ava arrived early, carrying her portfolio and every ounce of composure she could manufacture. The receptionist led her to the top floor. When the doors opened, she froze. He was already there. Elias stood by the window, exactly as she remembered him, yet nothing like before. His shoulders were leaner, his posture quieter, stripped of arrogance. The air around him no longer vibrated with dominance, but something gentler, fatigue, perhaps, or redemption. For a moment, neither spoke. The city outside pulsed between them, a heartbeat made of skyline and memory. "Ava," he said finally. She forced her voice steady. "Mr. King." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more an acknowledgement of the distance she'd placed between them. "I didn't know you'd be here in person," she said. "I requested it," he replied. "If that's all right." Her pulse betrayed her before her face could. "It's fine." He gestured to the long table where blueprints were spread out. "This foundation, it's different. It's not a company. It's something I owe." To whom his eyes met hers, steady, to the women I failed to understand, and to the children who'll grow up stronger because of them. A beat of silence passed. Ava lowered her gaze, tracing the clean lines of the design plan. The air between them buzzed with everything they didn't say. The meeting unfolded like choreography, precise, careful, full of pauses that hurt to fill. Ava presented her concept with her usual calm, open light. Warmth. Flow, a space that doesn't intimidate, but welcomes. Elias listened, really listened. His fingers steepled under his chin. When she finished, he said softly, "It feels like hope. Hope doesn't come cheap." She answered, "I've learned the expensive things are usually worth it." For the first time in years, she saw it, the faint trace of the man she'd once loved, hiding behind restraint. It wasn't the same charm, not the same power. It was quieter now, almost fragile. She hated that her heart recognized it. When the board members left the room, only the two of them remained. Elias stood by the window again. "You have 2 children now," he said quietly. "I read it in an interview." Ava hesitated. "You keep up with my life, I don't have to. You're everywhere." His voice softened. "You look happy." "I am," she said simply. He nodded, eyes still on the skyline. "Good. You deserve that." The words should have sounded easy. They weren't. Ava exhaled, setting down her folder. "Why this project? Elias? You could have chosen anyone. Why come back into my world, after everything?" He turned then, meeting her gaze. The sunlight caught the faint scar at his temple, the tired lines beneath his eyes. "Because I built too many things out of pride," he said. "I wanted to build one out of love, not the kind that hurts, the kind that heals." Her throat tightened. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued. "I don't deserve it. I just need to make something good. From what I broke." The vulnerability in his voice was unfamiliar. It wasn't the apology of a man seeking redemption. It was the confession of someone who had already accepted he might never get it. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in her chest. Instead, she nodded once. Then let's build it right this time. In the weeks that followed, Ava threw herself into the project. She told herself it was just work. But every day at the foundation blurred that line a little more. Elias was different now. He asked questions instead of giving orders. He stayed late. Not because he wanted control, but because he wanted to understand. Once, she caught him crouched beside one of her assistants, helping adjust a lighting model. The sight disarmed her more than any grand gesture could have. He wasn't the man who had broken her. He wasn't even the man who'd tried to fix her. He was something else entirely, a man trying to fix himself. And that realization terrified her more than anything. One evening, after a long day of revisions, they found themselves alone again. The office was quiet, bathed in the amber glow of sunset. Ava gathered her sketches. Ready to leave. I'll send the updated plans tomorrow. Elias didn't move. Do you ever think about it? She paused. About what happened? Her pulse quickened. There's no point. Maybe not, he said softly. But sometimes I wonder if things had been different. She looked at him, then really looked. The way his hand trembled slightly as he ran it through his hair. The exhaustion that came not from work, but from carrying a memory too long. You shouldn't, she said. It's done. He smiled faintly. The kind of smile that knows it's losing. Maybe. But I'll tell you something, Ava. Every building has a foundation. If it's cracked, you can either pretend it's fine or tear it down and start again. I'm done pretending. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed a picture from Mia, Noah, and Luna asleep. Tangled in blankets. Her world. Her reason. Ava swallowed hard. Good night, Elias. He nodded. Good night. As she walked out, he watched her go, the woman who had once undone him, now walking away again. Not out of pain, but out of peace. Still, when the door closed, he whispered into the empty room. At least this time, I got to see her smile. That night, Ava stood by her hotel window, staring at the skyline. Somewhere out there, he was doing the same. The city glittered all glass and forgiveness. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time, she didn't feel anger when she thought of him. Just warmth, faint, fragile, like the first spark of a flame that refused to die. No matter how many storms had tried to drown it. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of day that begins without warning and ends by rewriting the past. Ava's studio was alive with sound, soft jazz, the hum of conversation, the scratch of pencils against tracing paper. She had a meeting scheduled with Elias that afternoon to finalize the King Foundation's interior layout. It was business. Only business. Or so she told herself. Elias arrived early. He never did before. But that day, something in him wanted to be near her world, to see how she built beauty from silence. Ava greeted him politely, composed as ever. We can start with the community wing design, she said, gesturing toward the models. He nodded, but his eyes caught on something else, a pair of small sneakers by the door, mismatched in color. Then laughter echoed from the back room, bright and familiar. 2 children, a boy and a girl, barely toddlers, ran into view, chasing each other between the desks. Their curls were wild, their laughter effortless. Ava froze. Noah. Luna, inside voices, she said. voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. But Elias wasn't hearing her anymore. The boy turned first, curious, and the world stopped. Those eyes gray-green, stormlight and sorrow, the same eyes that had once stared at himself in a mirror full of regret. It was like being struck. The air left his lungs. The room tilted. Every possible explanation died before it could form. He crouched slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Hi there," he said softly, his voice breaking on the second word. The girl tilted her head, inspecting him. "You're the man from the big picture," she said. Ava's heart stopped. Elias looked up sharply. What picture? Luna pointed to the wall, a framed photograph of the King Foundation model, with Elias presenting the project. It had been featured in a magazine interview about Ava's design philosophy, creating spaces that heal. He looked back at her, and everything between them, the years, the silence, the lies folded into a single, unbearable truth. She could have denied it, could have invented a story, claimed coincidence. But what would be the point? The truth was already alive in the children's faces. Ava exhaled, voice barely a whisper. "Noah, Luna, can you go with Auntie Mia for a while?" They obeyed, hand in hand, the door closing softly behind them. The silence that followed was thicker than any storm. Elias stood still, jaw tight, eyes dark with something between awe and heartbreak. "They're mine," he said. It wasn't a question. Ava looked at him, and for the first time in years, she didn't see the billionaire or the man who broke her. She saw the father he never knew he'd become. "Yes," she said finally. The single word filled the room like thunder. That night, he came back. The city was quiet, lights blurring against the drizzle. Ava heard the knock long before she opened the door, already knowing who it would be. Elias stood there, drenched, not from the rain, but from something heavier. "Come in," she said quietly. He hesitated before stepping inside. The studio was dim. Only a lamp lit in the corner. The same photograph hung on the wall, the ultrasound print beside it. He stopped in front of it, eyes tracing the small silhouettes frozen in gray. His voice came low, raw. "You kept this." Ava crossed her arms, steadying herself. It was the first time I heard them. The night I realized I could build something that wasn't meant to break. He turned, emotion tightening his features. "Why didn't you tell me?" She held his gaze. "Because I didn't know who you'd be when you found out. The man I knew back then. He would have seen them as a liability, not a miracle." He flinched, but didn't argue. "I was wrong," he said, "about everything. Maybe, but it's too late for apologies." "I'm not here to apologize," he said, stepping closer. "I'm here because I have a right to know them, to love them, even if you never let me love you again." Her throat closed. "You don't get to say that like it's simple." "It's not," he whispered, "but it's the truth." Ava turned away, blinking fast. "They're happy, Elias. They don't need to be dragged into the past we destroyed." "I don't want to take them from you," he said. "I just want to belong somewhere again." Something cracked in her, then not completely, but enough for breath to tremble between them. He moved toward the ultrasound photo, eyes glistening. "I missed their first heartbeat, their first breath. I can't change that. But I don't want to miss the rest." And before she could stop him, Elias dropped to his knees. His hand hovered over the photograph, trembling. His voice broke on a whisper. I lost you once. I won't lose 3 of you now. The sound of it, that raw, unguarded plea, shattered every wall she'd built. Ava's tears came silently, tracing down her cheeks. She wanted to hate him for showing up too late, for turning her world upside down again. But standing there, seeing his hands tremble over their children's image, all she could feel was something dangerously close to forgiveness. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, weary, but alive. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect it to fit. I don't expect it, he said. I'll earn it if you let me. She looked at him for a long time, long enough for the rain outside to turn into a gentle rhythm against the glass. And in that silence, between past and possibility, something fragile began to mend. Hours later, after he left, Ava stood alone in the quiet. The children were asleep in the next room, the city humming beyond the window. She touched the ultrasound photo, the same one he'd held, and let herself smile through the ache. Maybe the storm hadn't passed. Maybe it never would. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the thunder. Because sometimes, truth doesn't destroy what came before. It rebuilds it differently, honestly, like the first flicker of light after rain. The storm didn't begin with thunder, it began with a headline. Billionaire Elias King and designer Ava Johnson. The hidden family of New York's Golden Sun. Within hours, it was everywhere: the tabloids, the business columns, the morning talk shows dissecting every angle. The world devoured the story: the fallen tycoon, the woman who had once been his lover, the twins born of silence. Cameras camped outside Ava's studio. Drones hovered above her house. The doorbell never stopped ringing. Inside, she drew the curtains tight and held Noah and Luna close as their small hands reached for her trembling ones. Mia arrived, furious. Who leaked this? Ava shook her head, too stunned to answer. Her voice broke. They're calling them illegitimate. Like they're, don't read it. Mia cut her off. You know who you are. That's all that matters. But Ava's calm facade was cracking. For 2 years, she'd built a world quiet enough for her children to breathe freely. Now the world she'd escaped had come pounding at her door. She turned on the TV once, just once, and saw Elias's face across every network. Every frame caught the same expression, the sharp lines of control carved deep into regret. At the King family estate, chaos reigned. His mother's voice was ice through the speakerphone. You've shamed us, Elias. Do you understand what you've done? I understand exactly, he said quietly. The board is threatening to pull funding. The foundation isn't about me, he interrupted. It's about the women it helps. Then step down, his brother snapped, before you take it down with you. Elias ended the call. The silence afterward felt cleaner than their voices. He looked out the window of his penthouse, the skyline glowing against the night. His reflection stared back, older, steadier, no longer afraid of breaking what was already broken. He had spent half his life building a kingdom that demanded perfection. Now, for the first time, he was ready to let it burn. The next morning, the press conference was set at the foundation headquarters. Every major outlet was there. The air was thick with anticipation, the downfall of a king. Ava didn't want to go, but she went anyway. She stood behind the stage curtain, heart hammering, hidden from the cameras, but not from consequence. Elias walked onto the stage in a charcoal suit, no tie. His presence quieted the room. For once, he looked less like a man performing control and more like a man stripped bare. The flashes began. The questions came like rain. Is it true you hid 2 children? Will you resign? Was this affair the reason you left King Holdings? He raised a hand, and the noise fell to a low hum. Yes, he said simply. It's true. A ripple of shock moved through the room. I have 2 children, Elias continued, voice even but alive. 2 beautiful, brilliant children with a woman who changed my life long before anyone in this room knew her name. The cameras clicked in a frenzy. Ava watched from the shadows, hand gripping the edge of the curtain. He went on. You want to call it a scandal? Fine. But the only shame I carry is that I ever let fear dictate how I loved. I won't hide them. I won't hide her. He looked straight into the sea of cameras. I'm not ashamed of love. I'm only ashamed of having buried it. The silence that followed was absolute. The aftermath was brutal but freeing. The board issued its ultimatum that afternoon: resign or be removed. Elias didn't wait for the vote. He drafted his letter, signed it, and walked out of the glass tower that had once defined his worth. Outside, reporters swarmed. Questions flew like arrows. He stopped for one. What will you do now? Mr. King. He smiled faintly. Build something that matters. Weeks later, the storm began to fade. The tabloids moved on to another scandal. The cameras stopped lurking outside Ava's home. What remained were whispers, the kind that time couldn't erase. But love could outlast. Elias kept his promise. He launched a small company from a modest office in Brooklyn, Lumos, a tech initiative that built interactive educational tools for children in underserved communities. When asked why he chose that field, he'd smiled and said, because every child deserves a foundation stronger than mine. The funding came slow at first, but purpose filled the gaps money couldn't. His life shrank, but it became real meetings in jeans, coding sessions with volunteers, coffee stains instead of power suits. And in the quiet hours after work, he visited the studio. That evening, Ava stood by the window of her office, watching the city lights shimmer on wet pavement. She could hear faint laughter from the children's room upstairs. Noah's excitement. Luna's soft giggle. The door opened quietly. Elias stood there, a little unsure. I didn't mean to interrupt. She turned, meeting his eyes. You didn't. For a moment, neither spoke. The air carried the weight of everything they had survived, not just the scandal, but the years that had led them here. You didn't have to do that, she said finally. The press conference, the resignation. You didn't owe me that. I didn't do it for you, he said softly. I did it because I want our children to grow up in a world where love isn't something to hide. Ava's eyes softened. And what about us? He exhaled. I don't know yet, but I'm done running from what's real. She looked at him, at the man stripped of power, but full of something deeper. Respect, resolve, maybe love again, though neither dared name it. Later that night, when the city had quieted, she found him outside, standing under the awning while rain fell like mist. Still chasing storms, she asked gently. He smiled, turning toward her. No, just learning how to stand in them. She stepped closer until the rain touched her hair. The city lights reflected in his eyes not the ruthless glint of ambition, but the calm of a man who had finally made peace with imperfection. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like they were standing on opposite sides of something broken. The world outside could keep its noise. Inside this quiet, Ava Johnson felt the smallest, most dangerous flicker of hope. Maybe they weren't rebuilding what once was. Maybe they were building something new with no lies, no shadows, only truth. Los Angeles had never felt gentler. The ocean breathed in slow, steady rhythms, as if the city itself was finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. Elias King had traded skyscrapers for sunlight. He'd sold his apartment in Manhattan, left behind the marble and glass, and moved into a modest house 10 minutes from Ava's. No press, no board meetings, just the sound of waves and the laughter of two children who didn't yet understand how fragile redemption could be. At first, he felt out of place. His hands, once fluent in contracts and ledgers, fumbled with baby bottles. He burned pancakes, spilled formula, tripped over Lego castles. But Ava watched him with quiet amusement, never mocking, just observing. One morning, as he tried and failed to braid Luna's hair, Ava stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "You're tying it like a business deal," she teased. He grinned without looking up. That explains why it keeps falling apart. The smallness of their exchanges, the laughter, the soft corrections became their new rhythm. It was domestic, disarming, terrifying. He hadn't realized how much healing sounded like a child's giggle or smelled like warm milk and lavender shampoo. Nights were hardest, not because of sleeplessness, but because silence left room for memory. Sometimes Elias would wake to the faint sound of the twins breathing from the next room, then lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many of their milestones he'd missed: their first words, first steps, first scraped knees. Regret didn't vanish. It learned to breathe beside him. One night, Noah woke crying. Elias rushed in before Ava could move, sitting on the floor beside the little boy's bed, murmuring softly. His hand trembled as he smoothed the boy's curls. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered. "Dad's here." The word dad came out shaky, unfamiliar but real. And when Noah's tiny fingers curled around his, Elias thought maybe this is what forgiveness feels like. The more time they spent together, the less they needed to explain. Ava, for her part, found herself watching him differently. There was no arrogance now, no shield of control, just patience, humility, a man trying, truly trying to be better. She saw it in the way he asked Noah what story he wanted before bed, or how he let Luna help cook, even when it meant more flour on the floor than in the bowl. Healing wasn't cinematic. It was slow, messy, stitched together by small acts of care. And maybe, Ava thought, that's what real love had always been, not the lightning, but the afterglow. One evening, the twins were already asleep. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Ava sat on the porch, sketchbook in her lap, a blanket over her legs. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. Elias came out carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her without a word and sat beside her. For a while, they just listened to the crickets and the ocean somewhere in the distance. Ava broke the silence first. "You know," she said softly, "for years, I thought love was the thing that destroyed me, that it made me weaker." Elias turned slightly, listening. "But maybe it wasn't love," she continued. "Maybe it was just the wrong person. Or maybe it was the right person at the wrong time." She looked up then, meeting his eyes under the dim porch light. Either way, it wasn't love's fault. He didn't answer immediately. He just reached out, brushing his fingers gently over hers, a touch that asked instead of taking. His voice was quiet when it came. "Then maybe this time, we stop letting time decide for us." Ava felt the words sink into her chest, steady and warm. He smiled faintly. I spent years believing fate was something that happened to me. But I think it's something we build. Together. She let him take her hand fully then. No hesitation. Their fingers interlaced, the way unfinished sentences sometimes find their endings. Later that night, when she watched him cradle Luna back to sleep, Ava realized something had shifted inside her. The bitterness that once defined every memory of him had dissolved into something softer, not forgetting, not erasing, but transforming. Forgiveness had become part of their language now, not grand or loud, but quiet like the hush that follows rain. Weeks turned into months. Elias started teaching coding at a local youth center through his new foundation. He came home with stories about bright-eyed kids who reminded him that change didn't need to be global to be meaningful. Ava expanded her design firm, focusing on community housing safe spaces for women rebuilding their lives. She called the project Haven. Sometimes they worked late at her studio together, their conversations spilling from blueprints into life. She would talk about texture and light. He would talk about balance and purpose. And somewhere in between, they found each other again, not as the people they had been, but as the people they were becoming. One evening, as sunset bled into the Pacific, Elias leaned against the doorway, watching Ava draw. Her hair glowed amber in the fading light. He thought of the man he used to be, the one who believed control was love, that success could fill the space where loneliness lived. And for the first time, he felt grateful for every mistake that led him here. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "You saved me, you know." Ava didn't look up. "No," she said. "You just finally learned how to save yourself." He smiled, walked over, and kissed the top of her head. "Maybe. But you were the reason I tried." She tilted her face up to him then, eyes glistening with something unspoken, not sorrow, not nostalgia, but peace. And when he bent down to kiss her, it wasn't a beginning or an ending. It was simply the middle of something real. Outside, the city hummed alive, imperfect, forgiving. Inside, two children slept soundly, unaware that the world had just quietly mended itself around them. Love, at last, had learned not to burn, but to warm. 3 years had passed since that first storm in New York, the one that had brought a broken woman and a restless man to the same car door. 3 years since lightning had struck not from the sky, but from the unlikeliest spark of 2 wounded hearts. And now, on an early spring evening in Los Angeles, the rain had returned, soft, silver, forgiving. Inside the Marlowe Gallery, a quiet hum filled the air. Guests moved between frames, champagne glasses glinting beneath warm light. Every wall told a story, a journey of water and glass, of reflection and rebirth. At the center stood the rain that started it all. It was a large canvas, almost cinematic in scale, painted in shades of cobalt and ash. A lone woman stood under the downpour, face lifted, her silhouette blurred by motion. In the distance, half veiled by rain, the faint gleam of a Bentley's headlights. Ava stood in front of it, her black dress falling in quiet folds, the color of midnight just before dawn. She didn't look nervous, though her heart beat in the same rhythm as the drops tapping against the gallery windows. The crowd pressed closer as the journalist stepped forward. "Miss Johnson," she began, voice soft with reverence. "This piece, the woman, the car, the storm, what does it mean?" Ava smiled faintly, gaze still on the painting. It means that sometimes, to see the light. She paused. You have to have the courage to walk through the rain first. The room stilled for a heartbeat, and then came the sound of quiet applause. Gentle but deep, like rain on glass. From the corner of her vision, Ava saw movement near the entrance. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Elias stood there, taller than she remembered, though time had softened his edges. He wore a simple gray suit, no tie. His hair dusted slightly at the temples. In his arms, Noah and Luna, now 5, clung sleepily, eyes bright with mischief and curiosity. The sight of them hit her like the first warm light after a long storm. Elias caught her gaze for a moment. Neither smiled. They didn't have to. Every memory between them, every heartbreak and healing, lived in that look. He set the children down, and they ran toward her, Luna first, Noah right behind, their laughter rising over the soft murmur of the gallery. Ava knelt, gathering them into her arms, her heart swelling in the way only mothers know. When she stood again, Elias was beside her. Rain pattered softly against the windows, catching the reflections of the painting behind them. It felt poetic, the echo of a night long gone, rewritten in light. Later, when most of the guests had drifted away, Ava and Elias lingered near the window. Outside, the world was blurred in rain, Los Angeles shimmering under its rare storm. Noah pressed his face against the glass, laughing as droplets chased each other down. Luna twirled in her small yellow raincoat, spinning in the reflection of the gallery lights. Ava watched them, her voice barely a whisper. They're fearless. Elias smiled. They take after you. She shook her head. No, they take after us, the parts that finally learned how to stay. He turned to her then, the glow of the gallery lights catching the warmth in his eyes. Do you ever think about that night every time it rains? She admitted. But not the way I used to. Back then, it felt like the end of everything. Now. She looked at the painting again. Now it feels like where everything began. Elias reached for her hand, not as a question, but as something inevitable. His fingers brushed hers, familiar and new at once. You know, he said softly, for a long time, I thought fate was cruel, that it gave us love only to take it away. And now I think fate was just waiting for us to grow into it. Ava's breath caught not because of his words, but because of the quiet truth behind them. He wasn't the man from that night anymore, and she wasn't the woman lost in the rain. They had both walked through their storms, and somehow found each other still standing, as the gallery emptied completely. Ava turned off the main lights, leaving only the glow above the central painting. The 4 of them, mother, father, son, daughter, stood before it in silence. Noah tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, is that you in the picture? Ava knelt beside him. Maybe, she said softly. Or maybe it's everyone who's ever been brave enough to start over. Luna looked thoughtful. What about the car? Ava smiled. That's just a reminder that even in the darkest storm, someone might stop for you. Elias glanced at her, then a private smile, full of the unspoken history only they shared. When they stepped outside, the rain had eased into a soft drizzle. Streetlights shimmered in puddles, and the air smelled like renewal. Elias held an umbrella above her, though she barely fit under it with the twins squirming between them. Ava laughed, letting her arm brush his. You know, for someone who once hated the rain, you seem to enjoy it now. He looked up at the night sky, where the clouds were beginning to thin. "I used to see it as chaos," he said. "Now I see it as grace." "Grace?" "Yeah, it cleans what you thought was ruined." Ava looked at him for a long moment, the man who had once built empires, now content to build a life. "You've changed," she said. He smiled. "You made sure of that." They reached the car. Before getting in, Ava turned back toward the gallery. Through the glass, her painting still glowed in the dim light. The woman in the rain. The car. The soft gleam of hope. She thought about all the versions of herself that had existed since that first storm, the heartbroken girl, the mother, the artist, the woman standing here now. And for the first time, she didn't wish to be anyone else. As they drove away, the city lights reflected across the windshield streaks of gold and silver cutting through the drizzle. The twins had fallen asleep in the back seat, Luna's head resting on Noah's shoulder. Elias reached for her hand again, his thumb tracing soft circles against her skin. Outside, the rain slowed, breaking into the faint shimmer of dawn. Ava looked out at the city that had once frightened her, that now felt like home. "It's strange," she murmured. "All this time, I thought the rain was what broke me. But maybe it was what washed me clean." Elias smiled, eyes on the road. "Then we owe everything to that storm." She turned toward him, her voice warm with quiet conviction. "No. We owe everything to the courage to walk through it." He looked at her, and in that shared silence, there was no past to forgive, only a present to cherish. The car moved forward, headlights cutting through the mist. In the rearview mirror, the rain glistened on the asphalt like 1,000 fragments of light. Love doesn't always arrive when we're ready. Sometimes it breaks us first, just to show us what we're made of. But if it's real, if it's the kind of love that sees through the storm, it finds its way back. After the mistakes, after the silence, after the rain.